Everyone, this is Jeff Risdon from the Detroit Lions podcast and Lions Wire. And today we're going to break down the Detroit Lions offensive line as it stands entering training camp. Talked about the tight ends the other day. This time, we're talking about the big boys up front. Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach, has an exceptional starting unit. It's been ranked the top in the league by a couple of different things. I certainly myself would rate them as the best starting five in football. I think the consistency. So there's the old axiom that you're only as good as your worst starting offensive lineman. Well, the Lions' worst starting offensive lineman is. It's either Glasgow or Kevin Zeitler, one of the two guards, and both of those guys are above average. Even on their worst days, they're still quality starters. So the Lions are looking really good there. Certainly the best tackle tandem in the league. Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell. Frank Ragnow in the middle, all pro, has learned how to play with the pain in his toe and various other parts of his body that are always hurting, and just monster in both the run and the pass game. Sewell, highest paid offensive tackle in football. He deserves it. He's been phenomenal as a right tackle. He can do so much. And by the way, his arrow's still pointing up. There are still a couple places where he can get a little bit better even. Not that he's not already fantastic. Decker, just rock solid left tackle. Veteran savvy, toughness, gets out well in the run game. Really good in pass protection, especially recovery blocking. I think is one thing that he's really improved on over the course of his Lions career. You look back, when he was drafted back in the first round, I think it was 2016. The Bob Quinn first pick. Thanks for that, Bob. By the way, got one right. He struggled when he got beaten initially, and he has worked very hard to get a lot better at the recovery blocking. If a guy gets around him, initially on the edge. He's figured out little tricks of the trade, the little, inside hand, just simple little things that good offensive linemen do. Taylor Decker has all those in the arsenal, and he deserves a lot of credit for making himself into a borderline Pro Bowl player. And it wouldn't surprise me if he makes one, perhaps this year. I don't see any signs of him slowing down or nearing retirement or anything like that. We'll talk about his contract later. I think he will be worthy of a contract extension, whether it's in Detroit or somewhere else. Remains to be seen. We'll deal with that when we jump off that bridge when we get to it, as the saying goes. But starting five, looking really good. I do want to talk real quick about Kevin Zeitler. Covered him in Cleveland. And one of the things that I noticed about him when he played for the Browns, right guard, he only plays right guard. His snap-to-snap consistency is unreal. He's not a guy who's going to wow you with it. He's not going to get out and lead the charge in front of a run as well as some other guys do. He's not going to anchor in pass protection as well as some other guys do, where he stonewalls them and throws them down to the ground. That's not what Kevin Zeitler does. He just doesn't lose reps. And he's so solid. Fundamental technique, balance, vision, football IQ. His hand placement is unreal, and it's so consistent. It's one of the things, I recently did a Raven-centric podcast. Shout out to the guys at 410, James especially, for bringing me back all the time. Thanks, Steve. But he talked about the same thing when we talked about Zeitler and what they were losing. He's like, we're just going to miss how good he is on every play. He just doesn't have bad plays. They don't exist. It didn't have them with the Giants either. It didn't have them with the Bengals either. This was a guy who was once the highest paid guard in football. He's a little beyond that now. He's not quite as athletic as he used to be. I noticed it watching the Ravens film. He doesn't get off the snap as quick, especially in the run game. He doesn't quite have the range that he used to. Man, he's good football player. And I think knowing him a little bit, I think Kevin Zeitler would very much appreciate being called a football player more than being called an offensive lineman, because he's a consummate football player. Very good culture fit. Very easy to see him plugging in and being a good starting right guard for the Lions. Glasgow moves to the left side. taking over Jonah Jackson's spot. I was very impressed with Graham Glasgow last year. My expectations were pretty low. I watched him in Denver. I watched him after the injury that he suffered where he got a nasty ankle foot injury that really made him struggle in Denver and gave them some buyer's remorse. One of the reasons why he was available to come back to Detroit. And he outplayed my expectations. I thought he did very well. Fine player. You could do a whole lot worse than Graham Glasgow as your starter. I think he's going to be seamless going to the left side. He's not going to be perfect. Unlike Zeitler, he does have bad plays from time to time. My biggest complaint with Graham Glasgow is he gets out into space and looks real impressive getting out there, and then he doesn't actually touch it. And no, I'll take that. He's not giving up a lot of sacks, not giving up a lot of pressures. Does a really good job. Very, very good player. Again, starting five, rock solid, no issues. Let's get to the bench a little bit because that's where things do get very interesting in 2020. Yes, offensive line depth. There's a lot of questions here. And not all of them are bad questions. Some of these are going to have very good answers. But there's a lot of unknown that goes on with this group, too. And let's start with the first obvious question is, who is the backup center? If it's Graham Glasgow again, it would certainly be interesting because they do have other people who've played center. So remember, Glasgow was the backup center last year. They didn't have anybody else on the roster who had ever snapped the ball before. They did have a couple people in and out on the practice squad, and one of those guys is back, and that's Michael Neese. He got a lot of second-team center reps during minicamp and OTAs that I was at over in Allen Park. Looks fine. This is a guy who's primarily been a guard, did also play some tackle, has experience with the Buccaneers and Jets in various preseasons and training camps. And he's been with Detroit. He knows the system. Certainly a worthy backup center should the Lions elect to keep him. He does have some competition. There are 3 undrafted rookies who are all guard centers. The most notable of them is Kingsley Aguakun from Florida. He got paid a lot of money as a UDFA. He did have other teams that he could have gone to. He chose to come to Detroit. And he's got some ability. There's no doubt about it. In OTAs and minicamp, and I got to preface everything that gets said about those time periods, they're not in full pads. It is not full go. It's pretty close to full go. Like, you can see the hand placement, and the rushers are in fact rushing and trying to do some moves on them, and you do have to counter them. And the big area where you really don't see anything is run blocking, because they, other than like getting out into space, you don't see like the hand placement to engage. You don't see the foot frequency and the balance and the those sorts of things while they're engaged. The hand fighting isn't nearly as much. So run blocking from the offensive line and tackling from the linebackers is actually the hardest thing to judge in minicamp and OTAs in my experience. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen it with a bunch of different teams. It's just, that's hard to replicate. So the biggest thing that you have to look at is with the centers, how well do they snap? How consistent is it? How good is their snap up off the snap? Getting out of their stance and getting up and getting ready to engage and things like that. And I thought that Aguakun was probably the best at that. I think he outshone Brian Hudson a little bit. And the other one is Duke Clemens. Duke played a lot more guard. In fact, I'm not sure that I saw him at center. He might have played some, I just didn't see it. That happens. There's a lot going on at practice, and when they're not focused on full pads, my session generally isn't focused on that offensive line, especially the interior. You just can't tell a lot. But my sense is that one of those guys is going for the practice squad for sure, and there could be a second if they show enough in training camp and preseason. My early money would be on Aguakun, but that's just it's still wide open because of the fact that they haven't been in DATS yet. And run blocking is a very important factor for this team. They do value that quite a bit. That's something that Hank Fraley and Ben Johnson, as the offensive coordinator, they're very big on run blocking and technique in run blocking, and also effectiveness in maintaining run blocks, sustaining your block once you get into it. Is a very big point of emphasis from Hank Fraley. It's a very big point of emphasis if you watch Joe. One of the reasons why Jonah Jackson rose so quickly in Detroit is the fact that once he got his hands on you, he locked you in, and you didn't get off the block. And that's not exactly Glasgow's strong suit, easy for me to say. It is something that Zeitler does incredibly well. So if there's any push where a guy can maybe make some noise, let's see him sustain run blocks and create a little bit of movement once he's engaged with the guy who's trying to get through him. And that's going to be something that we're going to have to watch in camp. We just can't tell that yet. That's true with Christian Mahogany, too, who is the 6th-round pick, who is, I don't want to say he's a lock to make the roster, because he ain't going to gut, folks. That's not going to happen. He fell for a variety of reasons. My normal co-host, Chris, will tell you that he has one leg that's longer than another. We did not directly ask Mahogany that. That would be a little bit Oxford question to ask a dude that we haven't met before. I'll just say, from looking at him, from watching him, from standing next to him during his press conference podium time, I didn't see any difference between, and so where I looked at it, I looked to see if his knees were at the same length. And I looked to see if his shoes were he was wearing cleats. Was one of them higher than the other? I didn't sense any of that. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have that, but it's not readily evident when you stand next to him and you see him move. He's got just incredible power. He was a top 50 prospect for me, so you're not going to hear any besmirchment of Christian Mahogany. He will be one of the backup guards. I would bet a lot of money on that. And if you want to take that up, he's in Atlanta at the airport, probably drinking somewhere. Yeah. So Mahogany will be one of the backup guards. So then you're looking at one of those other UDFAs we talked about before. There's a Gurkun, Hudson, Clemens. Will they make that roster as a 10th guy? And that brings me up the other question. I got it written right here. Do we keep 10? That's one of the big focal points for this offseason. How many offensive linemen do they keep? Do they actually keep 10? Well, let's go through the reserves, so you know you get your starting 5. Giovanni Manu, 4th round draft pick. I gotta explain why I always say 3rd round, because they traded a 3rd round pick next year for him. So in my mind, that registers as a 3rd round pick. I know that's not accurate. It was a 4th round pick, but that's just how my brain works, folks. So it is what it is. So if you hear me calling me 3rd round pick, it's because I'm referring to next year's 3rd round, which is what he is. But they took him in the 4th round this year. Look, I don't think he's ready to play. I do think he's going to make the team out of a simple, you don't let a 4th round pick that you traded a 3rd round pick next year. You don't cut that. You don't risk that to waivers. You just can't. So they're sort of stuck with him, and hopefully Fraley can develop him very quickly. But just keep in mind when you're talking about him, his skill set is really raw. He's all over the map with his technique, with his balance. He did not know how to come out of his stance with a tight end to his left. He'd never done that before. So it's ground zero of this guy. Now, the athletic potential, again, it's unreal. Go back and check some of the other videos we've talked about him. Listen to what some of the other guys have talked about him. His athletic potential, wow. It's really freaking good. It's up to Fraley to mold that into something that could be a functional number 9, number 10 offensive lineman as a rookie. he's coming from a league where he didn't even play against guys who would make MAC rosters. Think about that for a second. He's going against people that aren't good enough to play at Western Michigan or Toledo or Ball State. These guys are nowhere close to that level. So that gives you an idea of the level of competition that he's coming from. So, again, I cannot stress enough, keep your expectations for Manu low. If he exceeds them, hell yeah, man, that's great. That's what we want. And the athletic potential is certainly there, but this is not Taylor Decker's 2024 replacement. If Decker happens to get hurt, I don't want Manu in there. And I don't think the Lions want that either. I know the Lions don't want him in there in that situation. They just don't want that stress on him. This is a developmental prospect. But the simple economics of football dictate that you have to keep him on your roster. So that's one. Mahogany, just talked about. That's two. Not giving up on a sixth-round pick with that level of potential. And his ability to plug and play as Jonah Jackson 2.0, and I do think that's going to happen sooner or later. I think this is my theory. It's my theory. Kevin Zeitler is buying a year for Christian Mahogany to become the starting right guard. And if Mahogany is ready, I wouldn't predict that Kevin Zeitler would get cut, because I think there's too much value in having him around as a veteran mentor and also as a guy who's got oodles of playoff experience and big game experience and understands the business. So I don't think he's in any danger there. But if Mahogany could wind up being the starter by week 12, which wouldn't shock me, that's a good problem to have. But they're keeping Mahogany. So that's two. Colby Sorsdal, last year's fifth-round pick. Looks like he's moving back to tackle. So he was a tackle at William & Mary. He was being groomed to switch to guard, and it wasn't working all that well. He played almost exclusively tackle from what we've seen in the spring, and I expect that to continue, and I wouldn't be surprised if he winds up being the top backup tackle, replacing Matt Nelson, who's now with the Giants. Doesn't take a lot to replace Matt Nelson, what he gave this team. So Colby Sorsdal, looking a little fitter, looking a little bit leaner, has sort of the weight in his body and his torso has moved from down here, I need to lose it, up to here a little bit more. I also didn't lose it. He looks a little bit taller, and I'm hopeful that in his second season he can at least become the backup swing tackle. Again, you don't want Decker or Sewell hurt because that severely crimps the offense. You can't replace a guy with those guys with that skill with really anybody, but especially Colby Sorsdal, the way he's bounced around. Arrow is pointing up. Happy with there. I think he is definitively ahead of Giovanni Manu at this point. And so that's three reserves. You keep it. Dan Skipper's on the roster. Do you want to be the guy who tells Dan Skipper to make this team? He is the best sixth lineman in the league. When a team in the offense goes in and inserts a sixth lineman into the lineup, and the Lions do that more than all but one other team, he's the best at it. He's great. He reports on time, too. Whether the officials agree with that or not, that's a topic for another podcast. So I think Skip's a lock. He can play guard or tackle. The Lions have been loath to use him as a tackle, but he does have that background. He actually has a couple of NFL starts at tackle. Again, you can do worse, and the Lions have done worse than Dan Skipper being as an emergency option. So there's 4. It takes you to 9 guys right now. Haven't gotten to Natani Muti, who, by all accounts, not just mine, was the best interior lineman that we saw in this spring in OTAs, and especially minicamp. Another guy, experienced, a little bit under the radar because he played in Las Vegas. Didn't exactly have they didn't have a great line there. I'm very impressed with Muti. I think he's making this roster. and that means that there's 10. Do you cut Skipper? Do you cut Mahogany? Like, if you want to keep 9, that's the roster construction of keeping 10 means 10 offensive linemen means that you're making a sacrifice somewhere else, whether it's only keeping 3 running backs or whopping off a receiver or a defensive lineman. Do you keep the 10th offensive lineman in place of John Kaminsky? Do you keep him in place of 5th linebacker? Whether it's Jalen Reeves-Maybin or like these are things I don't know the answer to this yet. That's something that they are going to be working on and that we will see play out over time. But right now, it's June 27th. It's 1:30 in the afternoon. Put a timestamp there for you. I think they're keeping 10. And that means that the other position is going to get sacrificed. But I think you have to justify that 10th lineman because you've got a couple of situations there where you necessarily need that player, even if they're not going to play. And that's, again, when you draft a project like Manu, that's one of the risks that you have with it. They did it with Sorsdal last year. They knew he was a project. They knew he wasn't going to be ready to play, and they running the roster spot is the wrong terminology for it, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of anything else to call it. You're expending a roster spot out of necessity for a player that isn't a necessity on the field, and they were comfortable doing it last year. I have zero doubt that they have the expectation that they'll be doing it again this year. So, that's where we are. I do want to talk a little bit more about just a second. He can play left. He can play right. I think he's going to be the backup center. But, a little bit of cross-training there wouldn't hurt his chances either. So that's where we're at with the offensive line. There's a couple of guys. I didn't even bring up Coyote Ashika. He's made the team 2 years in a row. Can play tackle, can play guard. He's being pushed. I think that Muti and Sorsdal are basically better than him. He can prove me wrong. He can shut me up. He certainly has that potential to do that. I think the Lions have an awareness that he's sort of hit his ceiling. I think the other guys that I just mentioned probably have higher ceilings than him. Mahogany as well. But just fresher, approach to it. So at this point, I would have Coyote Ashika on the outside looking in, and he is a guy that if he's going to get cut at the end of preseason, you can flip him for a conditional 7th round pick because he does have that much experience. And again, you can do a lot worse than having Coyote Ashika as the bottom lineman on your roster. There are a lot of teams out there right now who don't have a guy as good as him that's going to make their roster as their last offensive line. So maybe Brad Holmes can cook up a trade for a conditional pick for him. I don't know. We'll see. I don't think they're bringing anybody else in. I just don't see that. Let me look at the depth chart here. Sorry, it was on my left top. Of the other guy, anybody that I didn't mention, Matt Farniok doesn't look promising. But again, Camp can decide some things. The roster has changed, and the perception of players does change as they play more. So you can't rule him out. Connor Galvin is back. I think he's a practice squad tackle. This was a guy who was out there. They didn't protect him with a futures contract and didn't sign anywhere else. That sort of tells you what the rest of the league feels about his potential. Very tall guy, very raw technique. But again, this is a staff that develops players very well. Let's see what they can do and see what he can do in preseason again this year. But with that, I thank you for joining me this afternoon on the Detroit Lions podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe so you know when these spontaneous little things are going to be coming up. I'll be doing these intermittently throughout the rest of the summer before we get to training camp. Little positional previews. Chris and I are hoping to do a live show in the very near future. Our schedules are teaming a little bit, so we might be able to get together and do something during the It's what I go with dead period. So make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you for all the comments. We appreciate it. And the kind thoughts about my ongoing health situations, both mine and my parents. Everything's going very well right now. Thank you. It's all good. With that, it's the Detroit Lions podcast. Thanks.